Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. My name is Mark Walsh, your host. Today I'm joined by Alexandra Vilvovskaya. Привет, моя сонza.
Привет.
Как дела?
Отлично.
So Russian, she's Russian, if that wasn't obvious already. Welcome to the podcast. This is the podcast for anyone interested in the body as more than a brain taxi. It's Saturday morning here in Brighton. The sun is shining for a change, and it must be midday there in Moscow, right?
Yeah, sure.
How are you doing?
Yeah, sunny, Saturday, nice life.
Good. So let's go into it. How did you get into working with the body? What's your route? So to introduce Vilya, Vilya is what people call Alexandra Vilvovskaya. She has a background in physics, in tango, in education, in trauma work. She's the co-lead of the Embodied Facilitator course with me in Russia, known as, she's working with Purpose Black Belt, an online course in Russia. She's kind of a big deal in Moscow as someone who's working with the body. How did you get into this? Were you always such an embodied person, Vilya?
I wasn't an embodied person for most part of my life. I am more for brain, and I work in marketing. I'm an educator and specialized in these fields and worked in these fields for many years. And it was 2001 or second when I started to dance tango. Because I like it, because it's beautiful, because it's emotions. And while I studied tango, I found that, I move okay, but it's not tango, and my body doesn't listen to me. And I was looking for different practices or different ways to improve my tango. And it was a very good time in Russia. Crisis. I ran my own business that time, and my business went down, and I have a lot of time.
It's the crazy 90s, yeah?
No, it was 2008, yeah.
Okay. And you were one of the first tango teachers in Russia, as I understand it. And you're still famous in Russia as a tango teacher.
I am famous not as tango teacher, but as a public person, because it was me. I work in marketing at that time, and it was me who started to talk to people that tango is new black, and all modern, young, advanced people do tango every day or every night. So I make a fashion for tango.
Nice.
So that was me.
So you got into you had several lives. I always think of you as someone quite mysterious. You are a ninja, and the crow, they call you sometimes. That's not black you're wearing today, which is native to you. And you've had several lives, haven't you? Sort of working in education, as a hardcore scientist, as a journalist, around Jewish issues particularly. And then you got into tango. And then how did you get into kind of trauma work or kind of wider embodied work from tango?
I met 5 written teacher that time, and I have no connection with the dance community or with psychotherapist community. And I like the idea of Gabriel Roth to be urban shaman. And I wanted to become urban shaman.
An urban shaman, yeah. Okay, got it.
And I found that the modern life, it's psychotherapy and dance and body psychotherapy. And I started to study first body psychotherapy, then dance psychotherapy. And through this body and embodiment work, I came to understanding of trauma, and then developed myself in this field.
And today you're working with several projects, aren't you? So you work with the Embodied Facilitator course, which is this multiple perspective training for different people.
Yeah.
You work with online trainings, but you're also doing quite a lot of one-to-one work.
Yeah, still do.
What kind of clients do you work with around trauma issues?
I have 3 types of clients. First is normal embodiment of body therapeutical work mostly with trauma. Another clients are more about business, and it's more about coaching work.
Yeah.
And the third part is the people who come with the question, where fuck my body is.
Okay, that's kind of the question that starts this whole podcast, really. Yeah. So what do you, let's start from scratch then. So there's some really interesting cultural stuff here, I think, to talk about that. We've talked about a lot, but imagine we haven't, because the audience won't have done. It's just kind of our obsession. We've been working together for 5 years now? It was 5 years ago you came.
Almost 10, in fact.
Wow. It's been a while. Very nice to see you, by the way. It's a nice thing to be doing on a Saturday morning, talking to you. So what are some of the cultural issues that you've seen around disembodiment in Russia? Let's go from the base.
As we have a very interesting, culture, we have a lot of type of trauma in our bodies.
Yeah.
And we reveal this trauma pattern in everyday life, and our decision, and of course in our embodiment. And as any people from different countries, you can find your neighbors in every country. Yeah, you can see this is people from UK, this is people from, from French, for example. And the same for Russia. We can see Russians everywhere. Because we have very specific body patterns, and we have a lot of tension, we have a lot of heaviness on our shoulders.
The Russian smile.
Russian smile, yeah, famous Russian smile. And of course, it formed how we live our life.
Yeah. So these patterns of armoring, kind of chronic tension, which we see universally in kind of traumatized people, they can also be cultural, right? So we've both been to Israel. There's a slightly different kind of trauma pattern than we see in Russia. So say a little bit more about that trauma pattern. And people might not be aware of the history as well. People might not be aware that kind of, 20 million died in World War II, which was more than all the other countries in World War II combined. They might not be aware of the sort of Stalin period or even the pre-revolutionary period, right? Like I learned only recently that most Russians were effectively slaves until, when was it?
1861.
Right. So it's a very different history than Western Europe in terms of how that was. So say a little bit about that history and how it shows up in the body.
First, that's necessary to understand, to remember about Russia, that this is a huge territory, and we have, and this is it. In fact, for me, it means that in our mind, in some sense, in our bodies, we have the feeling of this great big scale.
Yeah, 12 time zones, right? Just think of that, 12 time zones. It's half the planet.
Yeah, and that's why we can be very wide in our expression, in our body expression, in our war expression. So this is some part of white Russian soul.
So the urge to dominate. So it's talking about tension, talking about trauma, talking about this idea of expanding into space. And there's also this various aspects. And I know people are going to say, oh, you can't generalize, but I know a Russian who's very relaxed. And of course, that's true, right? There's, vast differences in subcultures and in individuals, of course. And then there's this kind of elegant intelligentsia piece. So the kind of St. Petersburg body. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? That's kind of fun.
Yeah, as everywhere, people in different regions and different cities differ, and we have the body of, I don't know, it's not politically correct to say common people.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it in English, sorry.
No, but they were working class, we might say, but there was a real difference in that the working class were slaves until 150 years ago,
Yeah, slaves, farmers, it's more about us. And another part is some norms of higher people. And as we can see through our mind and through our intelligence, we very care about our intelligence and our intelligence habits.
Yeah, yeah.
So to be intelligent, you have to be small, little bit mystic, maybe a little bit back. Maybe it's from St. Petersburg pattern, and not little bit not here.
Yeah,
not
yeah,
involved.
just slightly disconnected, and there's always a sense of I never quite know you, despite having known you for years. You're a mystery. You're always a mystery, and I get there's part of femininity, which we'll talk about next in that as well. So this trauma pattern sometimes comes up as a numbing, sometimes as a sort of hyper-intellectualism, right? Like I get really good questions in Russia. Like people ask smart questions, like Israel and Russia, best questions in the world when I'm working there. Like people are really like, wow, they've really thought about stuff. And the other thing I see is power expressed.
Yeah.
So if people have physical power or emotional power, financial power, sexual power, they show it, don't they? There's a very different relationship than the British have to power that I've seen.
And it's yes, and it's very interesting. In fact, I just remind several situations, several cases. It's something in our culture that we can do it. Look how we can. And it could be different things, something about money, something about intellectual things, sometimes about beauty, sometimes about sport. I don't know. We were the first in the space. It's very important. No, really. I feel proud of this.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's a pride, isn't it? Pride to the culture. And I'm very reluctant to speak about Russian culture. I'm in Russia, even though, I have a Slavic wife and Ukrainian shares a lot of features. They're not all. And, been there at least 20 times now. I know some of the language, but I'm still very reluctant to speak about the culture because I usually get you two, right? I'm like, what do you think, Vilya?
Yeah.
So we see the kind of trauma patterns around numbing, we see the pride, the kind of, the arts as well as intelligence, right? Like when we do a talent show, we do a talent show on a training we do. People play beautiful musical instruments and recite classic poetry. It's very normal for people to recite, know off by heart classic poetry, which, in England would be quite rare.
Really?
Yeah. Most people couldn't recite a poem in English. The average English person couldn't recite a poem. That would be considered exceptional talent.
We do it from the very first ages, so it's normal.
It's normal.
For normal people.
Ja vas lubil. So so then we should look at gender, really, because and we're talking about Russia, but we're talking about the world in a different way. That I see, the pre and post communist embodiment. So people your age and older have one embodiment, don't they? And people kind of my wife's age kind of have a different embodiment.
Absolutely.
You're growing up in a very different environment. And then there's gender. So I always say there's always like 4 very different Russian embodiments, male and female, pre and post communist. There's like 4 cultures in one when I'm in a classroom. Yeah. So do you want to speak a little bit about pre and post communist and then a bit about gender? Because that's a huge thing there, right?
As I could see, looking at the body, we see more flexibility, less tension, more movement, and
in the young people, right?
In the young people, more freedom, less limitation. What is good or what is bad to do?
The black and white thing is less there, isn't it? Like when we're teaching when I teach older people, they say, "Well, give me bullet point." Clear, and that's a clear trauma pattern wanting clarity of instructions, and they say, well, what's the right way and the wrong way? And with the young people I can say, well, you could do this, you could do that, you could be creative, Stalin's not going to kill you if you do it your own way, and there's a different flexibility there.
And for my generation, for example, almost communist generation, it's if you say what to do and how to do, it means you respect me and you don't put me in trouble.
Because it's dangerous, right? It's dangerous to not know what to do. It's very nervous, yeah. I mean, this is a rule for anyone who's working with traumatized populations, isn't it? That to kind of sort of give them a sense of safety and structure and say, it might even just be saying, look, this is what we're going to do in the beginning, middle, and end of the class. Here's the bullet points. You've got 5 minutes. I often in England just say, oh, practice. And in Russia, it's like I get a timer out and I'm like, right, you've got 5 minutes and here's the clock. And I put it somewhere can see.
And like Zany, if you need to change partners or something like that.
Yeah. So I tell them when to change partners rather than just say, "Oh, I'll change when you feel like it." And if I tried that in Denmark, that would be considered maybe controlling or rigid. Some of the Scandinavian cultures that are less traumatized, for example. But could be the case. If you're working in Denmark with traumatized people, that would be generally good advice, I would say, to give that structure and boundaries and clarity. And what about gender then? So this is one you've worked with a lot.
It's a very unsafety question,
Where to start? So, are Russian men and women the same in their embodiment? Let's just start there.
In some sense, yes. In some sense, no. Yeah. As post-communist people, we have some the same patterns, and as men and women, we have absolutely another patterns. And first one, men try to be big.
Yeah.
In any ways.
Man spreading, standing with a very wide base, just very literally, right?
Yeah. And it's first. And of course, women have to be narrow.
And they'll actually cross their legs, won't they? I know if you could stand up and show us, for those that are on video, a Russian leg cross. It's where people really cross their legs when they stand in a way which I find quite incredible that anyone can not fall over doing that.
Yeah, and again, if we talk about ages, I start to see guys around 30 or less who do the same, or sit in very female pose, like crossing legs or a little aside, and it's surprising.
Really. And what I've seen in Russia is kind of unreconstructed, sort of masculine and feminine. In the same way, you had a different history with feminism. On the one hand, the communists were sort of very feminist. In another way, it wasn't quite the same feminist as we had. So there's an acceptance that men and women are very different. And I remember trying to explain the idea of male privilege to someone in Russia, a very intelligent, English fluent yoga teacher, lived in America, and she just didn't get it. She was just like, well, we're just different. There was this sense of sort of men and women being very different, and that's not only the way it is, but sort of right and proper.
Mm-hmm. As we have different history of feminism, so in fact we was one of the first country of feminism since 1920s. So we, as to say, we didn't have another side. We have a lot of rights and a lot of obligations.
Yeah, so it's first wave, but not second wave feminism. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have no choice. We had no choice in this sense. And it's one point. Another point, a lot of wars and a lot of people died during Stalin time. We lost, maybe it's my projection, it's my fantasy, but I feel like we lost male population, active.
Well, 40 million Russians died from Stalin and Hitler combined, right? And that's a conservative estimate. And most of those were men. Yeah. So essentially, there was a point in the 50s, as I understand it, where there just weren't any men around. And sort of maybe the idea of masculinity got sort of lost a little bit. I've heard kind of Russian women today still complain there are not enough men in Russia, right? I've heard this. You tell me this. In Moscow, you say there's no good men in Moscow. And there's 51% women, I think. But there's still this idea in the system there's not enough men, or no one knows what a man is. Say something about
that. We have a funny poem that, of course, there are a lot of men around, but 10% are more alcoholic, another are gay, or another I don't know, some a big percent stay in prison, or and blah 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 blah. So sorry.
So there's a scarcity around men generally. I've seen this in the kind of system there. And because of scarcity, people act in a certain way, don't they? And the alcoholism, it's men live 12 years less than women in Russia. I've seen the statistics, and that's pretty unique around the world. It's only Russia, Ukraine, Belarus where the difference is more than 2 or 3 years. But there's also just horrific domestic violence and kind of violence against women. I mean, that's something I know you've spoken out about.
Yeah, we have another side of this, because if we have not enough good or strong or right men, it's a very hard market in this place.
Yeah.
So to get someone to marry, to have children or family, you have to do a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Russian women go to strong lengths, don't they, to look good, to look after themselves. It's really a tyranny in a way, yeah.
Yeah, and we say that when Russian women come out to buy milk, she doesn't go for milk. She goes to meet her happiness or prince or something like that.
And it's quite romantic, isn't it? You guys are quite romantic in the sense of the prince, and even sort of very educated women still have some sort of quite romantic, we might think old-fashioned kind of notions about this. And I know my wife is Ukrainian and shares many of the same features. On the one hand, she finds it tremendously relaxed and fantastic to be able to wear jeans and a t-shirt and walk down the street in her trainers, not having to worry about how she looks, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, she would never go to work without makeup. That would be, for her, that would be just but she also finds all English girls almost sort of comically ugly in how, and she finds it sort of, as a feminist, she doesn't logically, she goes, well, they're just how they are, and then, you know, why should they? But on another level, she finds it really difficult when she's surrounded by people who aren't making an effort with their clothes, for example.
Yeah. And we have, as women in Russia, we have to suffer for beauty.
You have to suffer for love, don't you, as well? Yeah.
For love, well, it's good, beauty, but for beauty, it's obligation.
Right.
If you're a woman, you have to suffer. If you are not suffer, you are not right, not good, not enough woman. So do it or not, I'll die.
I mean, this, just to broaden the conversation, this does get into some conversations about sort of core narratives that people embody, right? Like, there's not enough. Life is dangerous, you know. My wife always laughs. She's like, but life is hard, and she's struggling right now because life where we live is really easy and pleasant, and it's, you know, it's just a nice place to live, and we have enough of everything, you know. And I remember the time when you were on the train with me in England.
Yeah, terrible moment.
Do you want to tell that story? Because I think it illustrates how we can embody narratives at a kind of deep level. Yeah. And
I use this story too.
Do you want to tell the story, or shall I?
Yeah, we went by train, and I was with
suitcase. Suitcase.
Suitcase, and Mark entered to the train and just put my my suitcase somewhere. And we were sitting a couple meters from them, and I can't see it. And fuck, what are you doing?
So basically, it's a train in England. I know the journey. I know it's real safe. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, England doesn't have any crime or no one steals anything. But basically, for me, I kind of assessed this as a pretty safe situation. We don't need to worry too much about Vilya's bag. And we just sort of left it to the side somewhere out of view, but, you know, around the corner. And you freaked out, then you were anxious. And what we realized was it wasn't really logical. It was, I had this sense of, oh, life's fine, it'll be okay. And you in your bones have this sense, and much less than many Russians because of the trauma work you've done, that there's not enough, you have to be careful, life is dangerous, you know, and like life is hard and dangerous. And that's just in your bones in a way. And we both kind of laughed because it's just something you never would have done, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this feeling that it's not right to do it. It's not right to do it.
It's not
right. Doesn't
right.
matter why.
People, right and wrong is still a big deal there, isn't it? In a different way. You haven't got that sort of postmodernism, no right, no wrong, in the same way. I remember another example was my wife fell over in the street crossing Maraseka on the way she was translating for EFC in Russia that day. And she fell over, she was bleeding in 3 places. You know, she'd grazed both her knees and her elbow. She was, you know, clearly, you know, had hurt herself. I rushed to pick her up, you know, the masculine hero that's so popular there. And I said, are you okay? And she looked at me angrily and said, I'm fine. And what she meant was, I'm not dead.
Yeah.
like this sort of different level of toughness, and say something about that because people are just tough there as well.
Tough, and another part of this, not too sensitive.
Yeah.
If I'm not die, I don't feel anything.
Yeah.
And for example, working with the people in the groups when we try to explore stress response, for example,
Yeah.
when we use some tissues or some words, I found that it's our common pattern to increase the intensity.
Yeah.
And even in very small exercises, we try to we test ourselves.
Yeah. How much can I take?
Yeah. How much can I take? Give me more. I can more.
Yeah.
We're strong.
Yeah. I've seen that in Israel too. So maybe it's a trauma related thing as well. And, the two places I've seen it most. But, on the one hand, we have the universal stress response. So people have the same response around the world. We don't want to talk about culture as if there wasn't just basic biology as well. Like we have a shared humanity. I tend to overdo culture sometimes because I'm traveling so much. It becomes all very obvious to me. But then we also have this, this urge to go harder, faster, more. I'm still alive, and this is a particular tyranny, I think, for the men. Right? We've talked about the tyranny that the women are under and having to look beautiful and the sense of scarcity and putting up with domestic violence and alcoholism. But also the men are in a kind of tyranny as well because they have to be invincible, right? They have to be heroic and strong and know everything.
Yes, sure. Sure.
Well, of course, she says. I mean, it's very what I've noticed from men in Russia is very threatening if they don't know the answer to a question, and they'll try and sort of prove their intellectual strength to me quite early. They'll say, "Well, I've been on this course and I've done this," and it's almost. I used to get sort of offended and think, "What a bunch of dickheads!" But now I kind of just see it quite sweetly as kind of a pattern of they've people have been told they have to be invincible, and that's really tough for the guys. I mean, this is. Well, I mean, when we're talking about these gender patterns, they're the same gender patterns we see all over the world. That men aren't allowed to talk about their feelings, boys don't cry, man up. Yeah. Gender pattern we see everywhere. It's just that things are a little bit more extreme. That's all I see it as.
Yes, we like extreme. We are big. Do you remember?
Do things to the max, don't you? You don't half do it. You don't half do gender roles. It's strong there, and I'm still shocked by some of the gender role stuff. And even as a feminist, you like it when I open doors for you and put on your coat and pay for dinner and those kind of things, right?
Yes. It's another part of my feminism. I prefer not to do everything by myself.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Because that could be the pattern of, I don't need anyone else, right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, we've talked about a lot of interesting cultural stuff, but you've also pretty well traveled. Let's talk about some other countries. What have you said to sort of, just so we're not just talking about Russia here, you've traveled fairly widely. You've taught in the UK. I know you've been to France, the Netherlands, all sorts of places for work. Yeah. What else have you seen of embodiment on your travels to widen this cultural theme?
It's my favorite game to see people in the cultural embodiment. And for me, it's very interesting to see how it could correlate or could be linked to what people name cultural or national character. And I love cross-cultural studies very much because of it, because it's a big challenge to modern world where people travel a lot, make their places for living, for job, work together.
Yeah.
And it's all about communication and adaptation.
Yeah, we've had to work through stuff, haven't we, over the years? It took us a couple of years before we were working well together, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting how national character or cross-cultural communication rise from the body, from the embodiment. And for me, it was, for example, it was a real surprise, and I was happy when I started to understand from what body do you, people from UK, do your favorite sorry.
My wife always laughs how much people apologize.
Yeah, and all this
Excuse
movement
me,
a little bit back. Yeah.
embarrassed.
Yeah. And what does it mean in fact? Because
I mean, one way to look at this, and just to involve the listeners, might be to think, well, first of all, I know there's going to be a lot of listeners in the United States saying, oh, this is prejudice, you're making generalizations, you can't generalize, and it's just individuals. And
yes, I do this. Yeah, okay, why not?
Yeah, I get that. And of course, there's vast individual differences, and we're different on different days. So I want to, again, acknowledge that. I tend to find the United States, which has led embodiment work in the modern era, denies culture, because their idea is the melting pot. Their idea is we're all human beings, we all have human rights, and under the Constitution, and we're all in it together. So they tend to focus on the individual. Israel's the same, actually, because of their kind of immigrant culture, and that's fair enough, and there's beauty and truth in that. But I think to deny cultures doesn't make sense, particularly when you're in Europe and you only have to travel 15 minutes to cross a border and someone's speaking another language. And we're talking very broad brushstrokes here, and we could be talking about subcultures if we talked about ages or cities, one way of looking at this I see is what emotion is dominant and what emotion is not allowed.
Yeah.
As British people, we're sort of slightly embarrassed the whole time, like, oh, it's all right. But we're not really allowed to be like full of joy in the same way as maybe, I don't know, Italian might, or angry. Yeah. Like Russians can be like angry, and it's not necessarily a big deal. And the first time when that happened, I was like, whoa, So what sort of emotions have you seen on your travels?
I see a lot of, for example, I like some sort of lightness in France.
Yeah.
So it's not a big deal, or like
comme ci, comme ça.
Yeah. And I like this real. I used to see this feeling that I'm not alone. I'm involved in community in Italian.
Okay, very social, communal,
yes,
and pleasure loving, right? Because in Russia, life's not so much about pleasure as in Italy.
We don't have enough pleasure. We're not in Italy, bro.
I was on holiday in Italy, and it was just so obvious that like pleasure was so central to life. I always say it's my favorite place for a holiday for that reason. It's food, and it's sex, and it's art. It's like pleasure at all these levels, from the lower chakras to the higher. But it's very much about enjoyment. And again, I don't want to get into stereotypes. I'm sure there's Italians that are miserable and don't experience pleasure ever. But there's certainly a way in which, there's a reason it's one of the world's favorite holiday destinations.
Yeah.
Or the same reason, you go to Spain and it's much more relaxed than if you're living in London. There's maybe we could start a conversation in the Facebook group about, your cultural embodiment and what do you see in your culture. And I'm sure Russians will come in with other points about Russia and England and, other things. But hopefully that opens the door to people to look at that and play our favorite game of looking at people in airports and trying to guess where they're from as well. That's another funny game. Yeah. Did I tell you the story? I was on the beach in Mallorca, and there was a Thai guy that was doing massages, and he was running up to people, and he knew where they were from, even though we're all wearing bathing costumes. We all look the same. He'd run, and we were all sort of blonde and blue-eyed, and he would come up to you and know if you were German, English, Dutch, or Russian, and immediately speak your language. And I thought, wow, this guy's a genius. He's kind of reading everyone's bodies and knowing kind of where they're from and what they're having to say.
And from another side, it's interesting how our embodiment changes when we start to travel, when we start to aware of these patterns, and when we start to do something with ourselves. For me, it's very funny that board guards in Moscow airports usually don't recognize me as a Russian person, and they start to speak with me in English in Moscow.
Because you look different, strange. Yeah. Because you move different. You're more relaxed. You're more in your body.
Yeah,
I could see that. And I've lost some of my Englishness traveling to some degree as well. I've picked up stuff from Brazil. The story, I lived above a nightclub in Brazil for 6 months. And when I got back, my mum was like, where did you get those hips from? Like I was moving differently. Stuff from living in America. My wife says I'm getting more Slavic from spending 2 months a year in Russia and, living with her. So yeah, we can change. We can pick up bits of other cultures too, right?
Yeah. And find what we need and what we want from different cultures, from different bodies.
And I think that's being a true citizen of the world, because I hear people say, I don't have culture, or I'm a citizen of the world. And I'm like, yeah, bullshit. You know, even if your dad's half Japanese and half Korean and your mum's, you know, half Senegalese and half Chinese, you know, there's still a cultural background there of some kind.
And you grew up somewhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do some on cultural workshops. I do some exercises. I just said to people, please remind where you were in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
and remind these people and try to embody them. And it was excellent exercise. I lived in the very center of Moscow, on the one part of very center of Moscow, and I met a guy who lived in another part, the very center part of Moscow, and we look at each other and we recognize each other.
Yeah, you got it. You're like, oh, you're from my neighborhood. You're kind of my tribe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did an exercise people might want to steal that we do on EFC is at the beginning of the course, we make a map of the globe, like on the floor, and we get everyone to stand where they're from and then where they live. So we say, okay, the center of the world is London or Moscow or wherever. And, you know, even like North London, South London, people stand in the right position. And it's a really quick way of locating everyone in space. And so you don't have to have the conversation 20 times as well. It saves everyone being asked, where are you from? You know, that's a question we ask because we're interested in that. We're like, what's the soup you were cooked in? And we say, where are you from and where do you live? And, you know, sometimes people run around a bit if they grew up in 5 countries. But, normally there's something. Okay, so let's change topics. Are you wanting to smoke by any chance? You look like you. Yeah. So those of you that are on the podcast rather than the YouTube, Vilya is smoking an elegant Russian cigarette as she's wont to complete the stereotype of the Russian. So talks about trauma, talks a bit about culture. What else? What are you interested in right now with embodiment?
I'm interested in embodiment and business. Or something like business, how people can do more, maybe it's important for our country more than for Europe, for example, but how to do your own stuff and to be quite successful in this, and not to be blocked or limited with your trolls or shadows or some another demons.
Yeah. So, Vilya, I know you work with a lot of little startups, and we both run this course called Purpose Black Belt. You do it in Russia, I do it in the UK, where people are kind of finding what they love and making a living from that and removing some of these psychological blocks. We sometimes call them trolls, just as a sort of way of externalizing them. Why don't we talk about that then? So what are some of the main, and I think they're pretty international. So what are some of the main blocks you see, and how does the body relate to them?
What I see in Russia, because I work mostly with people from here, or post-Russian, post-Soviet people, this is a fear of mistake. This is a fear of being a bad person because you do business. And this is a real fear, and this is not just fantasies. A real fear to be, let's say, for example, police or state organization that where really can be put in prison very easy. That's true about our life. And so if you start to do something your own, if you have a risk to do,
you're poking your head up a little bit, aren't you?
It's you are brave. You have to be brave. And you have to be quite stable and strong. So that's why, in fact, it's wonderful numbers. About 40% of young Russian people thinking about their own businesses. But only 10% or less started.
Interesting. I don't have the figures on the UK. I do know it's incredibly common. I was in a cafe the other day and it was just full of kind of hipsters on Macs, just running their own businesses, doing their own thing. They all looked like they were working. It was in the middle of the day. And some of them may be very small companies, some of them potentially, multi-million pound companies. You wouldn't know from looking at them. But there's certainly this idea that it's kind of normal now. And there wasn't so much in my generation. It was a little bit normal, but now it's become very normal to be like, yeah, you go, you do your thing, you start up, whatever. And, it depends on the educational level and blah, blah, blah. But it's pretty normal now to this idea that you can do your thing. But I think there's always barriers of like imposter syndrome. Who do I think I am? And even though we might not get sent to prison, there's a similar but less fear perhaps of like, what will people think of me?
Yeah.
Like, am I going to lose, what if I look like an idiot? Now I get a lot of criticism online and some of my friends just kind of say to me, how do you stand it? How do you stand it? And I'm like, I don't know. Some days it gets to me, but mostly I just don't give a shit, and it's, I think that's a universal, this kind of social fear.
And we have a lot of social fear also because of our history. Because if you do your own business, for many years I grew in the atmosphere that where we have no private business, and if you do something very little, we have some legal form for them. For this, if you do it, it was half criminal.
Yeah, so everyone was kind of doing a little scam or a little thing, weren't they, to get by in the communist times? Otherwise, you just wouldn't be able to live. But you'd always be scared that the neighbors would report you, and then you're off to Siberia. Mm-hmm. So on that edge of like, well, I have to kind of do something to survive, but what if the neighbors find out?
Yeah, and it's another side we have as all of us. We have a very unstable situation, but here instability is the most terrible thing you can imagine, and that's why not too much people have this risk.
Yeah, there's often this feeling of chaos, and we have to make arrangements for currencies going up and down, don't we? Like we had a deal that I get paid half in rubles and half in pounds because we had to look after the fact that you didn't want to be paying twice as much as you thought you would at the end of a year-long contract. Like this, that's a real practical instability that we have to be careful of. Luckily, we did Brexit, so you won this year on the currency gambling. But who knows?
Not too much.
Not too much. It still helped though, right? The pound went down, but that's a real kind of genuine like scare that you've had banks that have gone out of business so many times. People have lost their savings so many times.
Yeah. It's a normal thing.
Normal thing for you, right?
And again, a little bit cultural. I think that we survived. Yeah, we have survived in the war, in crisis, in this and
every
that. Winter. So the main thing that it's not a war. This is important. Or another crisis. It's strong enough and experienced enough.
Yes, there's a real cultural narrative there, isn't there? And I mean, just your winters, it can be like -20 and things. It's your winters killed several armies that have attacked Russia over the years. I think the biggest laugh I ever got in Russia was when people came in from the cold and I said, you look like a dying French army, and people burst into laughter. The dark humor of that, but it's just like it's in winter. It's a good example of how the physical environment can shape people. I spent 2 weeks in Russia in winter, and the sidewalks, the pavements are often very icy or slushy. And I realized like every day I was spending 2 hours walking around, a little bit scared that I would fall over. And you could hurt yourself. A couple of times I did fall over, and I hurt myself quite badly. And I thought, God, I hope the hospitals are okay. And I remember thinking, wow, what if every day for sort of 4 or 5 months you're worried about falling over, and there's that anxiety and heels as well.
Don't forget heels.
That's impossible. I don't know how they do it. This was in trainers with good grip. I was falling over, and I just thought, wow, what must it be like to put that anxiety to get put into your system just from the physical environment? Forget about the financial or the political environment.
Yeah, and of course, different cities in Russia. Some of them are more beautiful and more comfortable. For example, I like St. Petersburg for this aspect, first of all. some of them much not so comfortable, or even awful, in fact.
Well, Moscow's what, 15 million people? I mean, it's like
No, 20.
20. It's huge. It's the biggest city in Europe, I think, outside of Istanbul. And roads with sort of 6 lines of cars. And you feel like the air's been breathed 10 times. You feel like every drop of water you drink has gone through 10 people's bladders first. You know, it's a mega city, right?
Yeah, huge city. And in fact, I like this vibe. And I
You like it, don't you?
I was born here, so
yeah.
I like it. But Moscow is very uncomfortable.
It's not comfortable. That's the word, isn't it? You're often uncomfortable, whether it's the weather or the crowds, or, you know, it's quite expensive as well compared to the wages. So that discomfort in the body.
Comfortable is not
a priority.
Priority.
You're surviving. Why would you want to be comfortable? Because this is a luxury. It's a luxury, right? Well, I'm so spoiled here in England. You know, I realize how spoiled I am. Every little thing that goes wrong, I kind of complain about. And if people are like slightly too hot or too cold, they complain. So let's go back to blocks, because, you know, everyone has blocks around confidence, for example. I was working with a group around perfectionism the other day, and I know that's one you come across there too. You know, how can we as embodiment practitioners help ourselves or others with these blocks? Because everyone has blocks to doing what they really want to do. Everyone.
My favorite game is to suggest people to try different postures. And as I'm from dance field, and I understand I'm more physical, to say, and I like to explain or to in detail, show in details how it works physically, and what people can do to feel themselves more stable, more confident, and just practice. Doesn't matter. My own experience in embodiment was a little bit surprising for me, because when I started embodiment, I was a body person, and I dance, and I aware of my body very well. And it's not a big deal, but I couldn't do different things.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just awareness, right? There's the choice. They're the two things. Both worked with.
And it was very practical things. It was relational things, or it was about money, or about sales, or about what can I do in this life. And it was a surprise for me that after a year, for example, a year and a half of more or less regular, very short, very simple embodiment practices, I just found myself doing the things that I can't even imagine that I can do. And I look at myself from the side, like, who's this person? I don't know her.
Yeah. I just recorded a podcast on practice last night. And one of the examples I was going to give them, somehow I forgot to, was there was someone on EFC in the UK, and they're working on being more earthy and more structured. And then they found themselves chopping a carrot in a really organized way, where every bit was the same length or whatever. And they used to do it just crazy. And they were freaked out, even though it was a tiny thing. They were freaked out that their pattern was changing to become much more sort of organized and regular through, I think it was martial arts or something they were doing, through the embodied practice they were doing. In a way, it's very simple, isn't it? It's that we have these blocks, but these blocks are bodies. You know, there's a body to lacking confidence. And if people want to try a little experiment at home, just stand in an unconfident way. You know how to do that. You've done it. You've seen it. You know, the shoulders slump or the head goes down or whatever it is. And then stand in an arrogant way, which is maybe people's fear. So it's worth differentiating that, right? And then standing in a confident way, which may be, you know, balanced and upright and expansive and relaxed. And we all know how to do that, because we've all, even the most nervous person, unconfident person, has been confident at some point doing something, and they've definitely seen it in others. So it's like, you know, kids start off as confident around a whole bunch of stuff. So we know that. And then it's just a matter of saying, well, there's a body to, let's take perfectionism, you know, that, I have to be this, you know, that tight and narrow body. And then saying, okay, so what's the body of not being a perfectionist, and finding the opposite, you know? And that's relatively easy. And then, as you say, all you have to do is practice, which is that's all you have to do. But that's we have centering to change our state, and then we have practice to change our being. And it's remarkably simple, isn't it, in a way, what we do?
Yeah, and I like it very much that it's simple. That's why I choose embodiment, in fact.
Yeah.
When I started start embodiment with you, I had a choice at the same time. Two different international programs started. One of somewhat somatic movement.
Experience. Okay, somatic movement. Okay.
Somatic movement, very deep, very sensitive program, and embodied facilitator course. And I choose embodied facilitator course, and you know what happens after.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Vilya was my student before we became colleagues. I mean, she was already had masses of, I looked at your CV. I was intimidated by your resume when you were coming over. I was like, wow, this woman's really done some stuff. I hope we've got things to offer her. But I guess what I'm good at is the pragmatic, right? And this goes, business really likes this, don't they? Like, you take these simple techniques to business and they're like, okay, great, something practical.
Yeah, and what I like more is a simple language, simple instruments, simple language. So I can describe, I can share something with people who, I don't know, maybe never heard about it, don't believe me.
Yeah.
So the simplicity of language, I like it very much. Comparing with my body and somatic colleagues.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in working class farm community. I was surrounded by farmers and mechanics and people like that. And, it's who you grew up with in terms of how you develop your language. Business has definitely fine-tuned that for me.
Yeah.
I find that business people are intolerant of bullshit language. Irish people are the same. My family are Irish. They just the PC thing, the kind of super hippie thing, just never did well in Ireland. I don't know if you saw that thread on Facebook last night with all the Irish guys kind of swearing and kind of having fun. And it's there's a cultural piece there too. But I mean, can you say something about working in business and especially in Russia, people can be skeptical. If you can do embodiment in business in Russia, you can fucking do it anywhere. So, give people some tips on this. I'll probably do a whole podcast on it, but give us some tips.
It's not easy thing because we hate our bodies, and because body, as traumatized people, we think body is dangerous, or body is something about shame, or anyway, it doesn't matter. In fact, too much. At least health is matter, more or less.
Yeah.
But in other details.
And that's the same everywhere, right? People are worried the body. You're talking about sex. They're kind of ashamed of it. There's this embarrassment.
It depends because as I could see, it's just a fantasy in Europe or in States.
It's a bit better.
It's more mainstream now. A lot of yoga, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of meditation, a lot of blah, blah, blah. And it's a mainstream.
Yeah.
Here, not.
Yeah, Russia's like 10 years ago in the UK in terms of like when no one had heard of mindfulness or emotional intelligence or these kind of, things that opened up embodiment for all of us.
It's one part. Another part where as we need to solve the problems, it's very easy to suggest the decision. And if people see the decision through embodiment, for example, if I'm centered, it's much easier to me to lead people or to manage people.
Yeah, command and control kind of model, right?
Yeah, and they got it very quick.
Yeah, people are smart there, aren't they? I don't want people to think I'm bad-mouthing Russian culture because it's one of my favorite places to work because people just get things, they if they can see the pragmatism of them. I mean, that's my experience in business more generally with embodiment. If people can see that it's useful for their values and their aim, they will do it and they will give it a go.
Yeah, and the problem, maybe the problem or issue in this field is that as we need to have a rules, understand what's right, what's wrong, how to do it correct.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it's a little bit hard even for me to explain how should I step the feet on the floor to do this on that, or
So
some
people
other
want very
details.
specific instructions, you mean? Is that the...
Yeah. Another idea is to compare the personal experience and cultural experience in instruction, for example, to be more balanced or more upright means to be ballet dancer.
Got it, because ballet is the Bolshoi, yeah.
Or something like this. So these details are important, and most of us don't feel and don't understand it very well. But through practice, no problem.
Yeah, through practice, people are just the same as anywhere. And it's, it's interesting. All this stuff we've talked about gender patterns and cultural patterns. As soon as you start teaching embodiment, that is all confronted, right?
Yeah.
Challenged, which it's a very political thing. Embodiment. As soon as you tell a kind of downtrodden population to stand up tall, you've done something political, and you've challenged a cultural pattern of this. But this is how I stay safe, by being small or by being beautiful and in quote air quotes feminine, right?
Yeah.
And telling a Russian woman, Paul Linden's over, and he tells the Russian woman to let their belly hang loose. And, and I'm like, oh God, how's this going to go down? Because it challenges, the average Russian woman will be super challenged by that, right?
Yeah. And in fact, this is, I grew up in the beginning, in the 90s, and it was a period of big changes in Russia.
Yeah.
And I'm revolutionary person inside. And I like the idea that something that I do through embodiment or my embodiment field, especially educating in this field, has this revolutionary smell.
Look at you, October girl. So there is that revolutionary spirit in some people, isn't there? And, as you say, the 90s was this crazy, chaotic period where anything was going. And that's when you were really growing up, right?
Yeah.
You were kind of, anything could happen, good and bad. Like, I'm sure you had friends who were kind of shot and, crazy businesses that went up and made $1 million and then were bankrupt the next day. The idea that embodiment is revolutionary, I think this is a good Russian theme to be talking about. So, say more about that. Like, if someone said, yeah, but you're just doing stuff for the body, I don't get it. Why is that political? Why is that revolutionary? What would you say to them?
For example, in corporate world, what does it mean that I feel my body?
Yeah.
It means that I have the right to organize my work in my personal way, for example. So
autonomy comes in, right? As soon as you bring in feeling, it's like, well, maybe I don't want to be told what to do. Maybe I actually don't want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Another part, as body is ethical, the question what I'm doing this job is embodiment question, and people, if I don't feel that it's good through my body, maybe I just stop to do it. Another thing, most important thing for me, it's about social practices.
Yeah.
Because everything we have in medicine, in regulation, in laws, in urban environment. So it's social practices, but they constructed mostly by disembodied people. Mm-hmm. And if I start to do it through embodiment way, through my embodiment, I start to change it.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to work with social activists, with designers, with urban specialists.
If you look at some of the sort of ghastly kind of communist architecture that still is there, and a lot, or this equally applies to modernist architecture in the UK, you look at it and go, this could only have been made by a disembodied person. If you feel your body, you would not make something as ugly as this.
From another example, for example, medical practices, medical procedures, medical rules. Here in Russia, it's often really terrible. And what does it mean? I'm embodiment person, and I don't know, with a child, for example, what does it mean? It means that I'm sensitive to different practice that take my child away if me or he or she ill or something like this. And I think that if we share embodiment ideas and embodiment practices and make people more embodied and more about it, we have a chance to change practices, social practices.
And that could be from medicine to education, architecture, business. It goes across all these fields, right? And all of a sudden new things open up. I mean, I sometimes there, and everywhere really brings me the idea of freedom. I say I'm interested in freedom, and that sounds very kind of cheesy and American almost, but it's like if you are stuck in an embodiment, you do not have a choice. There's no actual freedom there to choose whether it's a gender role or a cultural role or a result of the city you live in or a personal thing that came from your family, his family of origin. There's no real freedom if you just keep replicating a pattern and reproducing something. So, for me, the most revolutionary thing is like, okay, the how of freedom. So sometimes I'm interested in being liberated from a traditional gender role, for example. I'm like, okay, well, here's a concrete how you can do that. Of asking a Russian man to work with his vulnerability, for example, or a Russian woman to actually take up more space and be more seen. It's very concrete.
Yeah, how of freedom. Yeah, I like it.
How of freedom. Are you translating that into Russian already? I can see your mind. So, say more about relationship. Like you've danced a lot of tango with people. And I was talking to a mutual friend of ours who dances tango around Europe, actually. We're having this conversation. And, what kind of relational patterns do you see come out on the dance floor?
On dance floor.
Yeah, and equally when we're doing sort of simpler partner exercises, with business or whatever. Let's start with tango, because I think, we have people listening who'll be dancers and will understand that context. So what do you see come out in that context?
Tango itself is very gender dance, and it reveals traditional gender patterns.
So the men
lead, women follow. A woman as instrument for dancing maestra, for example.
Yeah.
Or some...
the emphasis on beauty as well.
Beauty,
right?
Yeah. But from another side, tango as... I like tango very much for this feeling of contact. As tango has quite strong rules and tradition, it helps to go to the contact.
So because it's boundary and structure, people feel...
Yeah, you have 3 minutes. Yeah. And you have a chance to be in very close contact, like...
Permission is given, actually, right, as well.
Yeah, this is the rules of this game. So, and through the tango, you can explore this and you can study, learn how to do it, how to be in very, very close relations, very open, very unpredictable, because it depends on different things. And how you start to do it, how you go in these relations, how you are in these relations, and how you finish this relation and can be a part of this person. So in this sense, for me, tango is a very good trainer for different aspects of relations.
So it's building those skills of being able to be boundaried, being able to be playful in relationship, being able to make contact.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. It's super traditional gender roles in a way. And in the UK, I've seen people come to it almost from a different point of view, that are sort of, they've gone through traditional gender roles and they've got rid of that. And maybe the kind of women have gone, right, you know, I start my own business, I'm in charge of my own life, I don't need a man. And the men have gone, well, I got more sensitive, I've built some emotional intelligence, you know, I've become a little bit more kind of, we might say, the yin side of things. And then they're coming out at tango going, yeah, but I actually want to lead. Or the women saying, well, actually, I kind of guiltily whispering in my ear, I quite like following. Or I really like wearing these high heels, even though I know they're terrible for my posture, or whatever it is. And it's a sort of whispered in my ear kind of, and I, you know, it's very interesting when I see tango, because there'll be groups of sort of Argentines sometimes in the class who are unreconstructed, men should be leading and women should follow. And then there's very, very modern people who have come out the other side, perhaps, of sort of the benefits of a kind of reversing gender roles a little bit. And are coming back to traditional gender roles rather than simply not having a choice about the matter. So I see two very different kinds of people in the UK playing with tango in that sense. But the other thing I've seen, you know, I've been to tango classes with a couple of ex-girlfriends, and it could really expose relationship patterns, can't it?
Yeah.
If there's any problems in your relationship, it's coming out in those 3 minutes.
Yeah, and very often when I was talking head of tango in Russia, should I come to dance tango, to learn tango with my wife or with my husband? I answered, think twice.
Yeah, be careful with that. That's what I discovered the hard way. Twice. 2 different girlfriends.
Yeah.
We ended up, one girlfriend actually going to different tango classes to learn, because we wanted to dance together, but it was just bringing up like way too much. And obviously when we work corporate groups, we don't dance tango, but we're doing little relation leader-follower, very simple leader-follower exercises like palms touching and walking backwards and forwards. People can find them on YouTube. And let's put in leader-follower, Mark Walsh or Vilya. And, you know, bringing up similar patterns, it exposes people's relationship dynamics. Do you dominate? Do you, you know, give too much space? Do you give not enough space? Do you have to make jokes all the time? Do you try and seduce people all the time? And you don't need to do tango to do that, right?
Yeah. But tango is beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's a complex form, and like any complex form, it takes time to learn, but there's a beauty to it. Yeah. I enjoyed dancing with you in Russia for our last when I was there last. I hadn't danced in years actually, but it was fun to do. It was fun to do. Okay, so we looked at tango, we've looked at relationships, we talked about trauma, we talked about culture. I mean, we talked about business quite a bit. That, you know, it's in one way a surprising move, but you were always in marketing. And you did a very good job at marketing Embodied Facilitator course. That's one of the reasons I work there so much, is that you're so good at marketing. You've got fairly big audiences for us over the years, and, you know, something quite successful. You're breaking new ground. You know, marketing's a part of Purpose Black Belt course that you do there. Say a little bit about marketing, because I know that's almost like a dirty word for a lot of listeners who are coming from more alternative embodied fields. So this is, as one of your areas, I'd love to hear you talk a bit about that.
I love marketing. I love marketing, and I love, for me, it's about relations. And for me, it's because from one side, I'm a person from marketing. From another side, I'm educator. And for me, marketing is the opportunity to spread ideas and to educate people. Couple of weeks ago, I did a post on my Facebook. From time to time, as a Russian person, I try to do something in the right way. Mm-hmm. So if a marketing guru or mentors or someone else say, please hear the pain of your people.
There's empathy right at the heart of marketing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's important, and it's one side to listen to the pain, and answer these pains. But I found myself from my own embodiment that I'm tired to talk about pains. I prefer hope. Mm-hmm. I prefer. Mm-hmm. Future inspiration, or some bright ideas, and there's some book, I don't remember the author, who wrote about this point of marketing. You can talk about lack of something, or you can talk about a rising of something.
Yeah. So look, with Purpose Black Belt, we do the exercise, the pain and what's possible. It's like if you don't find purpose, how that will be painful, but also like if you do, what the towards and away from, they call it in NLP, I think.
Yeah, and for me, it's more about embodiment principle and embodiment instruments. How are you now, and how you want to be?
Yeah.
And this is driver to move to preferable state, to preferable feelings, to preferable life. So for me, marketing is more about this. Of course, I listen to people, and of course, I try to be useful for them, because marketing and sales is about usefulness.
Yeah, you have to listen to find a need and then to meet that need, which is quite a beautiful thing that's at the heart of capitalism, even though, it goes to some ugly places sometimes. That basic principle of saying, okay, what does this person need? How can I make their life better? And then communicating that effectively, like, okay, you're hungry. I've got a sandwich. Did you know sandwiches make you less hungry? That's marketing. I think I'm going to do a whole marketing podcast, actually, on embodied marketing. And then so that's pretty straightforward, right? So we might ask, like, well, why do people then not do that in our field? Our field's full of intelligent people. What's the resistance to that? I think you mentioned one right at the beginning of the podcast. You sort of said, but business people are evil. We're bad people if you work in business. No one wants to be bad. And then the other one is these blocks again that we were talking about earlier, the trolls, we call them, that you're going to be seen if you do marketing. You actually pay for an advert to be extra seen. You want people to see you. That's part of, you're standing up in the marketplace and shouting.
Yeah.
Going to expose you. So say a little bit about some of the blocks your clients have about marketing, and I'll expand on these in the podcast I do on, I'm sure.
It's a common thing in every country, but maybe very important here is to be visible.
Yeah.
To be visible is one of the main fears, and okay, I'm a good person, I'm a good specialist, I'm a good company, we do some useful things, but I prefer not to be visible.
Yeah, like when I tell people I would like these podcasts to get 1 million downloads in the first year, that's my aim for these podcasts. I've seen people freak out. Like for me, they freak out. Or if I tell them, my YouTube channel has 11 million hits, they go, what? And they're scared for me. And also, if I think about that, I think, bloody hell, and it all brings up all sorts of stuff, not just as thoughts, but in my body.
And it's interesting how these personal embodiment patterns organize your marketing strategy, for example. For some moment, I found that I don't use Facebook advertise or some other type of advertise. It's okay for me walking through my Facebook, for example. I have a lot of subscribers or followers, and a lot of people know me. So I just can put some posts, mention somebody, and it will work, and it's okay. It's enough for me.
Sure. And go on.
At some moment, I found that this channel is almost empty.
Right, because you've all the people who know have been on your courses.
Yeah, and I need new channels. And I found that I don't use advertising. Why?
Yeah.
Because I don't know those people.
And what do Russians think about people they don't know, Vilya? So, like in Russia, Russians are incredibly warm and heartfelt in my experience. If they know you, like Vilya is one of my best friends, right? We're really close. Like people see us together, they think we're lovers or something because we're so affectionate and close and warm. But that's a few years in. That's not how you were when I first met you. And if you walk through the streets of Moscow, strangers just look at you like you're a piece of shit, you're dangerous, I don't know you, who are you? And it's very different than when you're introduced to someone with trust is a big deal there. This is another trauma pattern, right? That trust is a big deal, and strangers are dangerous. I mean, you've been invaded by strangers so many times. It's so how does that work with marketing?
For me, it's about, it was a very clear example how my personal embodiment patterns connected with the money that I can bring from sales. So,
and I'll talk more about this on the podcast on marketing, but people do have these embodied patterns that clearly get in the way of their embodiment of things that, success, and there's individual differences, right? Like your marketing and my marketing are very different. Or if we think of, say, Alina's marketing from Ukraine, she has this like wonderful, like sexy Ukrainian kind of style going on.
Yeah.
And that just wouldn't work for me. You have your sort of learned, mysterious style. I have my provocative style. I mean, we also need to kind of go with our embodied strengths, right? It's not just about unblocking ourselves. I like the short, not thought through, quick post that's edgy, and you might have a much longer, more considered, reflective kind of post. People didn't see that on the podcast, but really just touched their head it was a kind of Russian intelligentsia kind of movement. Yeah, I thought so. Okay. Yeah, so marketing is another one we could talk loads about, but you've certainly been you like to be innovative, don't you? You brought kind of tango to Russia, you brought embodiment to Russia through the FC course, the online stuff you've been innovative with. You have this urge for innovation, don't you? Is that fair to say? How would you describe it?
I'd like to. So
you do.
No, I don't do something special or something. It's not a big deal.
Don't discount yourself, Vilya. Come on, don't do that. You wouldn't let your students do that.
Who centering? Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. Great. So talking of centering, do you want to teach people the snowman centering that you we kind of invent our own versions of centering all the time on EFC, and Vilya decided to invent her own. So do you want to lead people through that as a practical exercise? So obviously, if you're driving, you might want to not do this, but otherwise, over to you.
So it's not mine. It's one of our graduates, our Russian colleague Sasha Bezrodnova, her method. So it's snowman. You can imagine it. You know how it looks like, and 3 snowballs, and you can imagine that the down part of your body, from the hips or maybe from the belly, is the first snowball, and it's big and stable and spread wide enough around you. And you can notice how your posture or your feelings or your image of yourself change with this image of big snowball in the down part of your body. And you have the second ball around your chest, and you are in the center of this ball, and this ball is quite big around you, and you can change how your body reacts on this image and what changes in your body. And the third snowball around the head, so it's also around and spread around your head, and to make this snowman stable, you have to balance all these balls. And again, just notice how your posture change or your breathing change when your body is the line inside big Russian beautiful snowman.
I love it. So I like the different ideas. Obviously, it's primarily a visualization method. But it also forces kind of postural balance, right? I'm thinking balls, okay, I better line these up or they're going to fall over. So I'm shifting my posture. And now the cooling kind of visualization is quite nice for that hot fight or flight response, I think. And, obviously if someone's in a sort of numb, cold, closed down place, that might not be so helpful, but I know you've got other options there. And I love how you've played with that. I mean, most people are walking around the other way around, right? With a huge head and a tiny little body, like an upside down pyramid. So kind of putting the base back as the kind of big thing there that lands us back on the ground. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Nice example of people coming up with their own centering techniques based on principles rather than just copying a teacher. Good stuff. Okay, so we need to go fairly soon. Anything else you'd like to speak about before I give you a chance to plug what you do?
I like that embodiment is international. And I like that all nations, all cultures, all professional communities can put something into this field and can talk on the base of the same values and find relations and find common language to talk and to develop.
It's nice, isn't there? There's this kind of very human quality to it. You know, the body is something we'll share, like the fight-flight response is completely cross-cultural. So even though we're looking at cultural differences, I think embodiment's just becoming, for the first time, multicultural. It's essentially, even though it had these roots in Central Europe in the kind of 20s and the Reichians, it was essentially very American, really, from the 60s until about the 90s to about the noughties. It was very kind of West Coast American, even. Yeah. You know, the whole Ezelan influence. And I'm going to get Paul Linden on. You know, he's one of the kind of people from that tradition, and talk about Strozzi and Wendy Palmer. You know, the big names are all American, and it's only recently become cross-cultural, I think, where you've now got teachers in France. You know, we've got teachers in Holland coming on the show. We've got Russians, Germans, English, of course. You know, it's Israelis. It's become much more cross-cultural now. For the first time, and it gives us a common language, but enables us to talk about diversity, and like we are, and say, oh, you know, there's this Russian trend or this English or Irish trend, and there's something quite beautiful in that. So that's maybe a nice place to end it. I'm going to call this podcast, I think, the Cultural Embodiment Podcast. Yeah. Okay, so where can people find out more about you if they're listening in Russia or they want to find you online, Vilya? What can they Google? What can they put in?
It's easy. Facebook. Alexandra Vilvovskaya.
I will type that on the.
Yeah, cool. Welcome. I have my own business page on Facebook and also the site Bees for Body for Bees. .ru, and I think on YouTube.
Purposeblackbelt.ru, is it?
Yeah, purposeblackbelt.ru.
Can you send me all those links, and I'll make sure they're the correct links, and we'll put those, online when Aggie puts it up. So, очень, спасибо большое. Спасибо большое. It's really, really nice to talk to you again, my dear. And I look forward to seeing you again in Russia soon. It's been a delight. This has been awesome. So everyone else listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for tolerating our ramblings. And if you want more of that, everyone, remember to subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or on the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.